Okay, let's unpack this. You can really feel the anticipation building, can't you? There's this buzz around whatever Nintendo's doing next.
Definitely.
And all eyes are on well, the heavily anticipated Switch 2. I mean, the original Switch, it was a game changer, no doubt.
Absolutely revolutionary with that hybrid idea.
Taking your big console games on the go. Just brilliant. But let's be real, for all its genius, it really started hitting its limits.
Yeah, pretty hard, especially with newer, more demanding games.
That's spot on. It totally redefined portable console gaming. But yeah, those hardware constraints, they just got more and more obvious over time.
As games got more complex.
Exactly. And that's why we're doing this deep dive today. We're looking into what our sources are saying about the technical side of this next system.
Right.
We've got this really comprehensive report. It outlines the potential performance, the features of the Switch 2.
And our mission here for this deep dive is really to cut through all the noise, and understand the core technical stuff. What are the really significant upgrades? What do those improvements actually mean for the games you'll get to play?
Yeah, the so what factor.
Exactly. And how does this next version not just continue that hybrid idea, but finally tackle those performance issues that held the first one back?
We're going to look at the core specs, the absolutely vital memory and storage boosts, and a really interesting bit of modern tech they seem to be using, DLSS.
Right.
We want to understand how it all kind of fits together, to shape the experience for you, the player. But before we dive into the silicon, what's the general timeline looking like? And are we expecting a totally new design or something familiar?
Well, based on the report, all the signs point towards a release sometime in 2025.
Okay, next year potentially.
Yeah, which means it's been over 8 years since the first Switch came out. That's, well, it's a lifetime in tech, right?
Oh.
The physical design, the form factor, it's expected to stay pretty true to the original's hybrid concept. Keep that core appeal.
Makes sense. Don't fix what isn't broken, I guess.
Pretty much, though the sources do mention some physical tweaks. A slightly larger screen, 7.9 inches, LED apparently.
Ooh, interesting.
Magnetic Joy-Cons, which sounds like a nice little quality of life touch.
Yeah.
And just generally a sleeker design. But like you said, the real story, the big changes, they're all inside.
Okay, so let's get under the hood then. The absolute core of this whole upgrade, based on the analysis we have, is a custom NVIDIA chip, the T239.
Right, that's the new engine.
This thing is driving everything.
Exactly. And inside that chip, the CPU is getting a really substantial upgrade.
Okay.
The original Switch had 4 ARM A57 cores, right? But typically only 3 were really usable for games. This new chip, T239, it reportedly has 8 ARM Cortex A78C cores. And importantly, 6 of those are accessible to developers.
Wait, 6 cores for devs. That's double what they had before. That sounds like a pretty big jump in processing power.
It is.
What kind of new things does that let game designers actually do?
Well, it massively increases their capacity for complexity in the game logic itself. So, think about building much more intricate game worlds.
Right.
Implementing way more sophisticated AI for enemies, or NPCs, running richer, more detailed simulations within the game.
Okay, stuff the original just couldn't handle.
Exactly. Those were areas where the original Switch's CPU was definitely a major bottleneck. And even with the leaked clock speeds, they're around 1101 megahertz handheld, and interestingly, a bit lower docked, around 998 megahertz.
Huh.
Yeah, even with that, simulated performance suggests the CPU could be nearly 6 times faster overall.
Hang on a sec. That doesn't sound right. The CPU speed is potentially lower when it's docked, when it should have more power.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating point the report brings up.
Why would they do that?
Well, Digital Foundry, who are referenced in the source, they speculate it might be linked to how memory bandwidth behaves when it's docked. Somehow that interaction might affect the CPU speed. So what it implies is maybe a different power or thermal strategy in docked mode. Perhaps they're pushing the GPU much harder when docked, for higher resolutions.
Right, targeting the PV experience.
Yeah, and maybe the CPU speed is managed differently as a result. Whatever the reason, it's definitely a unique optimization puzzle for developers. How do you handle CPU-heavy stuff when the speed might actually dip slightly in the mode with the most overall power?
That is a genuinely weird wrinkle they'll need to figure out. Okay, so the CPU is way more capable overall, but with this strange dynamic, what about the graphics side? The original had that NVIDIA Maxwell GPU, 256 cores. What's the jump looking like there?
So the new chip reportedly moves to NVIDIA's Ampere architecture, and it's packing a much, much larger 1536 CUDA cores.
Wow, okay. from 256 to over 1500.
Yeah, and the source data suggests clock speeds around 561 millihertz handheld, and then way up to 1007 millihertz when it's docked.
Big difference there, too.
Huge difference. In terms of raw power, like TFLOPs, that's estimated at about 1.71 TFLOPs handheld, and a pretty hefty 3.072 TFLOPs docked.
Okay, that's a massive leap from the original, which was what, under 1 TFLOP even docked?
Oh yeah, way under.
So how does that translate into, like, actual gaming performance
Yeah.
compared to stuff we know?
Well, the simulated benchmarks in the report suggest the GPU could be around, get this, 7.5 times faster than the original Switch, even just in handheld mode.
7.5 times faster handheld. Wow.
Yeah. When it's docked, the performance is being compared to something like a desktop GTX 1050 Ti.
Okay, respectable.
And handheld is apparently better than a GTX 750 Ti, but still, below something like the Steam Deck.
Gotcha.
But the really key thing here is Ampere. That architecture brings support for modern rendering features. We're talking ray tracing.
Right.
And absolutely crucially for the system, DLSS. That's where the potential for a really big jump in visual quality comes from.
All right, so we've got way stronger core processors, CPU, GPU, big upgrades.
Yeah.
But anyone who pushed the original Switch knows performance wasn't just about that. Memory and storage were huge problems.
Oh yeah, massive bottlenecks.
What does the report say about those areas?
This is somewhere the sources really emphasize as being just as critical, maybe even more so, than the CPU and GPU leap.
Okay.
The Switch 2 is reported to have 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM.
12 gigs. That's a lot for a Nintendo handheld. That's more than the Series S has.
It is, yeah. The Xbox Series S has 10 GB, so this is 2 GB more. And it's a huge increase from the original Switch's 4 GB of much slower LPDDR4.
Wow. Okay. And how much of that 12 GB can games actually use?
The expectation is around 9 GB will be available for developers. That's nearly triple the 3.2 GB they had on the original.
Triple the usable RAM.
Okay. But honestly, the even bigger story might be the memory bandwidth.
Ah, the speed of access.
Exactly. The original was stuck at a pretty slow 25.6 GBs per second. The Switch 2 reportedly boosts this dramatically, around 68.256 GBs handheld.
Much better.
And a massive 102.4 GBs when it's docked.
Whoa. That sounds like it directly tackles that, vicious cycle of poor performance feeling you sometimes got. What does that huge increase in RAM size and speed actually mean for the games we'll play?
It's absolutely fundamental for modern game design. It really is. With more RAM and much faster access to it, devs can load way higher resolution textures.
Right, sharper visuals.
Sharper visuals, much more detailed scenes, more objects on screen. It makes bigger, more seamless open worlds far more achievable, less loading, less obvious pop-in.
Okay, that's huge for immersion.
Definitely. And it just directly leads to significantly faster loading times overall. This isn't some minor tweak. It's like essential infrastructure for bringing current-gen type experiences to this platform.
And what about storage? Because the slow internal memory and especially the slow cartridge loading on the original could be, well, painful sometimes.
Yeah, that gets a major overhaul too, according to the report. Internal storage is supposedly upgraded from the old 32 or 64 gigs of eMMC.
Yeah, tiny and slow.
To 256 GBB of much faster UFS 3.1 storage.
Wait, 256 is a good starting point and UFS 3.1 is way faster.
Right. And on top of that, the report mentions they're including a custom file decompression engine, FDE, kind of like what the PS5 uses.
And FDE. So, like, dedicated hardware just for unzipping game data.
Pretty much, yeah. It takes that really intensive task away from the main CPU.
Ah, freeing up the CPU cores.
Exactly. Frees them up for actual gameplay, physics, AI, whatever. So combine that FDE with the faster UFS storage, and you should see dramatically shorter loading times.
Makes sense.
And much smoother asset streaming, which is vital for open worlds, loading stuff seamlessly as you run around. It just makes sure the faster RAM and GPU aren't sitting there waiting for data.
Okay, so beefed up CPU, much stronger GPU, huge boosts in RAM amount and speed, faster storage, dedicated decompression hardware. But the sources really seem to focus on DLSS, this AI upscaling tech. Why is that so pivotal for the Switch 2?
Yeah, DLSS is highlighted as really critical, and it's because of where the Switch 2's raw power sits compared to, say, a PS5 or Series X.
Right, it's still a portable chip at heart.
Exactly. So DLSS is NVIDIA's AI-powered upscaling. Basically, it renders the game at a lower internal resolution, maybe 720p, maybe even 540p,
Uh-huh.
and then it uses a trained neural network, uses AI, to intelligently reconstruct the image at a higher target resolution, like 1080p or maybe even 4K for docked.
So it's like AI guessing what the missing pixels should be, but doing it really well.
That's a good way to put it. It predicts and reconstructs, often adding detail or cleaning up shimmering and artifacts in a way that simple, traditional upscaling just can't match.
Okay.
And the Switch 2 is said to support DLSS 3.5. That includes features like ray reconstruction, which specifically improves the look of ray-traced effects.
Ah, better ray tracing quality.
Exactly. But the report notes something really important.
Mm.
It apparently omits frame generation.
Frame generation, that's the DLSS 3 feature on PCs that creates totally new frames in between the rendered ones, right? Makes things look smoother.
That's the one.
Why would they leave that out?
Well, the analysis suggests it was probably a conscious choice, driven by the limits of a handheld device, balancing performance against power draw and battery life.
Gotcha. Trade-offs.
Always trade-offs.
Yeah.
So while ray reconstruction will make ray tracing look better, the lack of frame generation means the console isn't going to be artificially boosting frame rates by inserting these AI-generated frames.
So the performance you see is the actual rendered performance.
Pretty much, yeah. It's limited by the core hardware speed, not AI making up extra frames.
What kind of real-world examples did the sources mention where DLSS is making a difference?
The report pointed to things like Street Fighter 6 potentially running internally at 540p.
Wow, that low.
Yeah, but using DLSS to upscale it to 1080p while hitting a solid 60 frames per second when docked.
Okay, that's impressive if it works well.
And Cyberpunk 2077 was also mentioned as using DLSS across its different modes. The main takeaway from the report is that given the Switch 2's hardware compared to the other current consoles, DLSS isn't just a nice-to-have visual boost.
It's essential.
It's positioned as a fundamental necessity for actually getting demanding third-party games to run at acceptable performance levels and visual quality on this thing.
So for a lot of these big, graphically intense games, developers will almost have to build their performance plans around using DLSS.
That's certainly the conclusion drawn from the analysis, yeah. It looks like it's viewed as a key enabling technology. It's what broadens the potential game library beyond what the raw hardware alone could handle.
Let's circle back to that hybrid design. The original Switch had a performance difference, handheld versus docked, but honestly, sometimes it wasn't huge.
Yeah, it varied a lot by game.
How does the Switch 2 handle that dynamic based on this report?
It indicates the performance split is way more pronounced this time. Docked mode is where the system really gets to, stretch its legs.
How much more pronounced are we talking, like percentage-wise?
The analysis suggests docked mode could offer up to 35% higher overall system performance compared to handheld.
35%. Okay, that's significant.
And you see it clearly in the specs we talked about. The GPU clock speed nearly doubles when docked, right? 1,007 millihertz versus 561 millihertz.
Right.
The TFLOP numbers jump significantly too, 1.71 up to 3.072. And even the RAM bandwidth gets that boost, from 68 up to 102 gigabits docked.
Aside from that weird CPU speed thing we mentioned.
Right, that's still the odd exception, dipping slightly lower docked. Developers will need to work around that. But the overall picture is definitely that docked mode is where you'll see the Switch 2 performing much closer to like a traditional home console. It leverages that extra power available.
And the dock itself is key to making that happen, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a passive stand anymore.
Absolutely. A really crucial detail mentioned is an active cooling fan built into the new dock.
Ah, finally.
Yeah, that's essential. You just can't sustain those higher clocks and performance levels for long without active cooling. The original dock completely lacked that.
That makes a huge difference.
Totally. And the system is also reported to support up to 4K output at 120 Hz with VRR when docked, compared to 1080p at 120 Hz handheld. So the design really seems to prioritize delivering a more robust, sustained, console quality experience when you hook it up to your TV, relying on that extra power and, critically, the better cooling.
Okay, all these hardware upgrades sound genuinely impressive.
Yeah.
A big step up. But at the end of the day, the games make or break a console.
Always.
What does the report suggest about third-party support for Switch 2? Are developers on board?
The general feeling reported from developers seems positive, yeah. And the list of confirmed launch titles, set for June 5th, 2025, according to this source, it looks quite strong. About 23 games listed.
23 at launch.
Mm-hmm.
Any big cross-platform games showing up early? The kind that need this new power?
Oh, yeah. The list includes some heavy hitters that definitely show off the increased capability, likely thanks to DLSS. Things like Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition,
Okay, well,
Street Fighter 6, Yakuza 0, Hitman World of Assassination, Hogwarts Legacy, Civ the 7th, Fortnite, Sonic X Shadow Generations.
that's a solid lift of big third-party names right there.
It is. Plus, a good mix of other stuff like Kunitsugami, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2S, and interesting indies like Deltarune Chapters 1 through 4. It seems like a pretty diverse lineup right from day one.
And looking beyond launch day, any other big titles confirmed or rumored?
The source also mentions titles like Elden Ring, Tarnished Edition,
Ooh, Elden Ring on Switch too.
Hades II, Hollow Knight, Silksong Finally,
Right.
and Borderland were listed as either confirmed or strongly rumored for later in 2025 or beyond.
Okay, and the ability to even consider bringing games like Elden Ring or Cyberpunk to this platform, it loops right back to everything we've just discussed.
Exactly.
That big CPU jump, the massive memory and storage fixes, and especially DLSS acting as that crucial, almost necessary piece to get these demanding games running well.
Precisely. Those technical advancements are what make that kind of third-party library feasible this time around.
Mhm.
The Switch 2 really seems designed to keep that unique hybrid Magic players love,
Yeah.
while bridging a huge gap in raw power compared to the original, making a much wider range of modern games actually possible.
So let's try and wrap this up then. Thinking about all these technical details,
Yeah.
what does this deep dive ultimately mean for you? The person who just wants to play games on this thing. What are the key takeaways?
Okay, well, it means you're looking at a system with a genuinely significant hardware jump inside, driven by that new T239 chip.
Right.
The huge upgrades to memory and storage. They're specifically designed to kill those frustrating bottlenecks from the first Switch. So think much faster loading.
Yes, please.
More detailed, larger game worlds, less distracting pop-in. And DLSS. It's highlighted as this fundamental, almost essential tech. It's going to be key for getting lots of those big third-party games running well, looking good on this hardware.
And while it keeps that core hybrid identity, that ability to play anywhere, the performance difference between handheld and docked looks much bigger this time.
Definitely.
With the docked mode getting a really substantial boost thanks to pushing the hardware harder and, crucially, adding that active cooling in the dock. And the early third-party games list seems to reflect that new power.
Yeah, the picture painted by these sources is a console that really wants to keep the core appeal, that unique hybrid playstyle, while making a major leap in the kind of games it can actually run and how well it runs them. So smoother performance, way faster loading, better visuals, thanks to that AI stuff, and just access to a much wider library of demanding modern games than the original could ever manage.
It definitely sounds like a really compelling evolution of the concept. Okay, so here's something to leave you mulling over.
Mm-hmm.
Given that really unique quirk with the CPU, potentially running a bit slower when docked, and this apparent almost fundamental reliance on DLSS for so many big third-party games, how creative will developers really need to get with their optimization? To specifically navigate the Switch 2's unique architecture.
Right, it's not just a straightforward power increase.
Exactly. Will this lead to genuinely tailored versions of games that really maximize its specific strengths across both handheld and docked modes, rather than just being, simpler ports? It's definitely a fascinating challenge to think about as we wait to see this thing in the wild.